let me give kind of a short primer or an overview of what in the world this thing is that is HRV. So HRV is just shorthand, obviously, for heart rate variability. And if you do not know what heart rate variability is, I want to just take just a few minutes. I won't go too deep into this, but again, go to that podcast I did with Ben Greenfield. But I just want to take just a short, few minutes to explain, what heart rate variability is, because there's a lot of misconceptions. A lot of people think that heart rate variability is heart rate, and that's not the case. Heart rate variability is derived from your heart rate. It is a biometric understanding. However, it is not the same thing as heart rate. So HRV and HR, or heart rate, are not the same. Let me just explain it to you really, really simply in ways, in kind of an example that I think everybody can understand. So we all know that we can take our heart rate. We can take that through, different types of wearables, or like a chest strap, or you can just, count. You put your 2 fingers on your carotid artery, and you can count the number of beats that occur within a 10-second time frame, and then times it by 6, because there are obviously 60 seconds in a minute, and therefore you can derive your heart rate. And so a heart rate is just an average. It's an average amount of the beats that occur per minute. So let's just utilize some simple math. So someone who puts on a chest strap, or they put their fingers on the carotid artery, and they count the number of beats that occur in a minute. Let's say they have a heart rate of 60. So if they have a heart rate of 60, that means that within that minute time span, their heart beat 60 times. Now, intuitively, we would just think that, okay, so if it beats 60 times in 60 seconds or 1 minute, then that means that their heart rate beat every 1 second. So every second, or in heart rate variability terms, we use milliseconds, so that would be 1,000 milliseconds. So every 1,000 milliseconds, or every 1 second, the heart would beat. Now, intuitively, you're not wrong. I mean, average out, the time frame would be, indeed, 1 second, or it would seem that way. However, that would mean that, again, that the heart is pacing itself every 1 second it beats. Now, does the heart work like that? Is that how heart rate is derived? And the short answer is no. Let's think about heart rate. So with each heartbeat, there was always a heartbeat that came before the current heartbeat, and there will always be a heartbeat that comes after. And if we had 1 second in between those, then the level of heart rate variability there, if that was 1 second, every 1 second you had a heartbeat, the amount of variability would be 0. You would have a heart rate variability of 0, because that's what HRV, it's the variability of time that occurs in between successive heartbeats or adjacent heartbeats. So again, if the heartbeat that came before the current heartbeat had a 1 second interval of time in between it, and then your heart beats, and then a second later the other heartbeat came, then that would be 1 second, or again, 0 heart rate variability. That's not how the heart works. Actually, if we saw that, that's quite indicative of someone who is in some serious need of help cardiovascularly, because the heart is pacing themselves. Now, you wouldn't typically see someone with a heartbeat or a heart rate of 60 beats per minute, as I'm giving in this example. Again, this is fictitious. You wouldn't see that representative of someone who would have a paced heart like that, but it could happen. And that's kind of like a telltale sign that the heart and cardiovascular respiratory system is pacing itself because of something seriously wrong. Here's another great example as how heart rate variability is derived. So here's one thing to think about. When you inhale, and this is across the respiratory cycle, when you inhale, the heart rate is going to increase. And that's because the foot is actually going to be drawn off what's called the vagal brake. So that's the vagus nerve, the 10th cranial nerve, which is responsible for modulating our relaxation response. When we actually inhale, the gas pedal isn't laid down when we inhale. It's actually the brake is pulled off a little bit. And so the heart rate will increase. And if you think about it this way, what's happening here is that we are receiving a lot of oxygen that should now be delivered throughout all the tissues into the body to be utilized effectively. So we want the heart to pump faster in order to take oxygen both to muscles in the body, but also to obviously the brain. And so because of that, the vagal brake is relinquished when we inhale. Heart rate increases significantly. So you can go from, let's say, a 50 up to a 70 within the span of the inhale. And as you exhale, then that's actually when we place our foot back on the brake. brake, or we press it a little bit harder than what we did when we were inhaling, and the heart rate will significantly slow down. So you may have a heart rate that starts off at 50, then when you inhale, it goes up to 70, and then as you exhale, it goes back down to 50, or maybe even lower than that. And that change across the respiratory cycle is called respiratory sinus arrhythmia, and is actually one of the most significant influencers of heart rate variability. So a lot of people will ask, so does that mean that you can extend your inhalations because that's more of a pressing of the vagal brake, more engagement of the parasympathetic nervous system? And the short answer to that is yes. And guess what? The more and more you train that response, the more and more the brake listens to you, the more and more you can excite or exercise control over that part of the nervous system. So I always tell people that, again, like the lowest hanging fruit and the biggest influencer of changes in the nervous system and heart rate variability is slowing your breathing down and utilizing proper breathing mechanics. What you'll actually find is that when you slow your breathing down, if you just focus on pace, that many people actually will effectively change the mechanics just naturally. It's kind of this organic thing that happens, not all the time, but a lot of the times. So that's one thing that you should really watch out for. So is the inverse to that hold true? So if we increase the rate of our breathing, if we make our breathing more labored or even more shallow, will that affect heart rate variability? And the clear answer in scientific literature is absolutely. So if you are more rapidly breathing, if you're having more shallowed or labored breathing, then what you'll see is a significant drop in overall heart rate variability, and you'll see an increase in heart rate. Rapid breathing is a direct signal to the brain and the central nervous system from your cardiorespiratory system and autonomic nervous system that you are undergoing a threat, because the body almost perceives it as, oh, you must be running. There must be the mountain lion must be chasing you right now. And that may sound a little bit like hyperbole or exaggerated, but that's actually how things work. I mean, the brain hasn't evolved to understand the signal that much differently. Now, we can cognitively understand that when we're, receiving a scathing email from our boss, or, we have trouble with finances, we cognitively know that the mountain lion, that there's not an actual mountain lion or threat to our survival or life, which it could be, technically, but in the moment it's not, like as if you were, walking around in the mountains and a mountain lion jumped around the corner. However, the brain is not super great at identifying that, and because so, it actually will respond very similarly to the scathing email as it would to a mountain lion, just maybe on a less significant scale. It's like the gas pedal might be pushed down halfway with a scathing email instead of a full way. But if you compound that over time, day in, day out, hour after hour, without sending another signal of safety and protection, then the problem is that you see this slew of deleterious effects that then come afterwards, because the body and the brain really don't know the difference. It's under this constant state of threat for your survival, and in the end, it's going to do what it can to help you survive. And a lot of times that's through pacing kind of your heart rate in order to create some level of homeostasis to the amount of chaos that you're experiencing. Now, let me clarify too, and hopefully that makes sense. There's a general rule of thumb that the more that you can raise or modulate your HRV at will, that's more sign of control of your of overall parasympathetic control, but also as well as vagal control. Just because you have parasympathetic control doesn't mean you have vagal tone. Very different concept. Not worth our time to get in here, but we'll cover this in future podcasts. But it does mean that you have more control. A lot of people kind of, and this is again kind of takes us down a rabbit hole, so I won't spend too much time on this. But a lot of people believe that a higher baseline HRV is indeed what we're looking for. And there's a little bit of truth in that, but not much. Thanks for listening to the Hanu Health Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. This podcast would not happen without listeners and supporters like you, and the best way to support us and the show is to head on over to iTunes and provide us with a 5-star review. This helps us reach others and spread the good word of breathing and stress resiliency. If we read your 5-star review on air, please reach out to podcast@hanuhealth.com with your name and mailing address, and we will send you some sweet Hanu gear. Until next time, breathe better and stress less.